Welcome to the Get Real Movies podcast. My name is Daniel Chadwick Shubat. I am your host, and this is episode 2 of our independent film focus series, where we focus on independent films that you might not have heard about. Today, we will be chatting to the director of Young Werther, José Lourenço. I had a really wonderful time chatting to him about this film, and not only the film itself, but also the making of the film and the long process behind getting it made. Jose was really gracious with his time, and I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having this conversation. Young Werther is now out in limited theaters across Canada, and you can stream it in the United States. The rest of the world I don't know about, but I'm hoping it reaches your theaters and screens very soon because it is quite whimsical and quite fun and unique, and it's definitely a film that is worth giving your time to. So without much further ado, here's my interview with Jose. And now it is my pleasure to introduce José Lourenço of Young Werther, the director of Young Werther. Jose, how are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining the show. I was really looking forward to this since I planned it with the wonderful folks at Route 504, and I've been looking forward to watching the film, and now I have, and now I get to chat to you. So I'd just like to say congrats. First of all, it's your first feature, and not too shabby for a first feature, eh?
I mean, I love that. Thank you so much. I'm glad you were able to see it and enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get into it, I'd love to ask you what was the process behind getting this movie made and getting such a wonderful cast as well, especially for a first feature. It's always cool to get such a talented cast together. And I guess I'd love to know a little bit about the process behind that and how this film got made.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the story of this film getting made is very similar to many other films in that there were a lot of stops and starts and highs and lows and 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I first wrote this screenplay and this adaptation of the book 12 years ago. And over the years, there were other directors attached. There were other actors attached. It was set up at studios and streamers. But you know, getting a film put together it's a house of cards, and so yeah, there were moments where I wondered if the film would get made. And then during that time, as we were sort of trying to assemble a team for the film, I started directing more and more. I had initially just been screenwriting, and that was all I ever aspired to. But after some conversations with directors that we were interviewing for this movie or other movies, I started having the idea that like, oh, why not me? Why wouldn't I direct the things that I write? And so I started making shorts and music videos and commercials. And it was kind of a blessing in a way that the film fell apart so many times, because in the ensuing 12 years from the writing of the script to having it made, I gained enough experience to feel confident enough to take it to Wildling Pictures here in Toronto and say, here's the screenplay and I'm going to direct it. How do you feel about that? And there was enough of a body of work that they felt secure in that. We're able to make the case to our financing partners. We had some luck with Telefilm providing us with an initial piece of funding. And then there was private investment and gap financiers and tax credits and all the pieces that go together to make a Canadian independent film possible. And then the casting, once we had sort of structured the financing for the film, my writing manager was an executive producer on the film. His name's Mason Novick, and he's been working in Hollywood for years. His big client is Diablo Cody, and his first big success was the film Juno. He's made movies like 500 Days of Summer, and he's got an incredible filmography. So he was very helpful in finding us a great casting director, Angela Demo. And between Mason and Angela, we were able to get the script out to a caliber of actor that I am, so proud to have in our film. Like every one of the major roles in the film, I'm absolutely tickled by who we were able to come be a part of this story. Douglas Booth was one of many actors interviewed for the role, and he really just owned it like immediately. Like it's just he personally, I'd seen him in like the Riot Club years ago, and then many films since, and I always knew him as this sort of leading man type in a dramas and sort of more brooding sort of roles and in quieter parts. But as a person, Doug is so charismatic and so full of life. And yeah, just immediately I was like, oh, this is our Werther. And Alison Pill needs no extra plaudits from me because she is just one of the most talented actors, full stop, working today. So I knew Alison socially like years ago, a little bit. And yeah, I was so glad that she responded to the material. And once we had our Werther and Charlotte, it was everything else started falling into place. Wonderful Amrit Kaur coming on board, amazing Canadian actor, Patrick J. Adams, Scott Thompson from Kids in the Hall, which was such a major influence on me as a kid. And yeah, Johar Ben Aid. And yeah, just a wonderful cast all around.
Well, and I love that it was a really good Canadian cast as well. It was funny seeing Patrick J. Adams play a lawyer again, because that's how we all got to know him.
Absolutely.
But
Yep.
I do think, especially speaking about Werther, Douglas Booth, it was strange for me to see him in such a quirky, sort of different role, because I'm used to him as sort of the posh, as you
Yes.
mentioned, in the Riot Club, and that was one of my favorite films that I've seen him in, and I remember that I saw that and was like, wow, he's got a lot of talent. So, but it was quite interesting seeing a different side to him. Speaking of the film, though, it was very Canadian produced, an independent film, and then you got to have your world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival. How was that? I'm a big fan of the film festival, and I've gone there many years. So how was it sort of introducing it to the world at a Canadian film festival, and the biggest one?
It couldn't have been more thrilling. Like you, I've been an audience member at TIFF for 20 years since I moved to the city. It's one of my favorite parts of living in Toronto is going to TIFF every year. You know, when I found out that we were accepted to TIFF and that we are going to be playing the special presentations program, it's the same program the previous year where I'd seen like The Holdovers and Anatomy of a Fall and Zone of Interest. And I was like trembling. I was like this, because, you know, TIFF is, you know, it's our hometown festival, but it's also, as you say, it's a top festival. It's Cannes, Venice, Sundance, TIFF, you know, like that's the, I don't know. It's just a dream come true. But then as much as it is a major festival and such an honor to play, it was also like a hometown sort of a very, very fun event. I got to go to the premiere with my mom and dad and my wife and my brother and his husband. And, you know, it was the first time that my mom and dad saw the film. And, you know, just their reaction afterwards was so special too, because, you know, to this day, my mom and dad were like, your father and I were talking about the movie last night. And I'm like, oh yeah. And, you know, and yeah, she's many times said it's was one of the best nights of her life. And she'll joke. She was like, you know, your wedding was fine, but that night at TIFF. So yeah. I mean, something we'll all remember forever. Absolutely.
100%. And I do think the audience at TIFF is definitely one of the better ones to introduce it to, because as much as they're polite, they'll also let you know whether it's good or not. And they let you know pretty quickly, I've noticed.
Yes.
But in a polite Canadian way, of course.
Right.
Yes, of course. So I did want to ask a little bit about the film, because it is based on a German book. I quite like the introduction that you made. It was the Beatlemania of literature at the time, and I'm from Liverpool, so whenever someone mentions Beatlemania, it creates a very visceral image in my mind. But tell me a little bit about your relationship with the book and what kind of prompted you to write this screenplay 12 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the book I didn't know at all until I was made to read it for a class in university, and I liked it just fine. But it was, you know, one of many books that I read for that class, and you know, once I wrote my paper, it just kind of went back on the shelf. And then many years later, I picked it back up off the shelf and had kind of had, you know, my own share of romantic entanglements and misadventures, and there's just something about the story and the characters that resonated for me in a different way. And yeah, I just got to thinking, like, this book has survived for 250 years and has been adapted countless times into films all across Europe, operas, plays, mangas. There's so many different versions of Werther. And it just seemed like the themes and the narrative and the characters were as relevant today as they were then. And I don't know. I mean, is this a book that you knew when growing up? I feel like it's still widely taught and known across Europe.
It's not one that I was ever introduced to. Once I looked into it, I was like, okay, it is quite well known, especially in Europe. But, you know, England like to see themselves not a part of Europe even before Brexit. So it was not something that was taught, sadly.
There you are. Literature of the continent. Who needs
Yes,
that?
of course.
Yeah.
Well, we have many good authors in the UK, so I feel like they want to stick with them first, you know?
Yeah, there's a in Germany they might say that Shakespeare is England's Goethe, but in England they would say, "Pardon me."
They'd say, "Who's that?" Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, England and Germany famously have a great relationship, right?
Always the best of friends.
Always, always. But I do like this film. It is a modern adaptation, but there are little tidbits kind of laid out in the movie that I appreciated. The what is this, ancient Germany, old school Germany. I did like that a lot. Was it always the plan to make this a modern adaptation, or was it ever going to be something set in sort of 1800s, 1700s Germany?
I mean, I do love the idea of one day making a period film with all of the texture and the costuming and the richness of a world like that. But what was exciting to us with this was sort of bringing that kind of aspiration, that visual aspiration, to a contemporary setting. And I think our production designer, Kiera Vernon, and our costumer, Courtney Mitchell, and our cinematographer, Nick Haight, did such a wonderful job of creating this sort of contemporary Toronto that has some of that like richness that I associate with sort of like 18th century period films where just everything feels melodramatic and everything feels romantic and lit beautifully and softly. And we kept talking about wanting to flatter the faces in the film and have the characters go on a color journey and a wardrobe journey that just has that luxuriousness that I associate with, films that portray those earlier eras accurately. Yeah, it was like a fun puzzle and an adventure all through prep and while we were shooting. And yeah, I couldn't be more pleased with how it all turned out.
Yeah, 100%. And I do want to talk about one specific scene. There was one shot that I really loved, and it was when Douglas Booth Werther is calling Charlotte, and it's going through the days, and the shot just changes from, happy to sad, dark, and I was just wondering what was the thinking behind that scene? Was it just like we gotta speed up, and this'll speed up the narrative, or was that something that was kind of thought of and planned out really well beforehand?
That was completely intentional. That one. That was as we were shooting, someone was like, "Oh, this is a great production hack to really save some time." And I was like, No. This was like the intent was always there. I think that was one of the things in the first draft of the script. I feel like a friend of mine who's an editor, Matt Hannum, who's just the loveliest guy and just such a genius. One thing that we always talk about is the difference between something that feels like cinema and something that feels like television. And of course, there's so much crossover, but there are opportunities in film to do things that feel, I mean, I shouldn't make this generalization across the board, but you know what? Forget all the stuff I said about Hannum. Just this shot, this scene, it was an opportunity to do something that felt, just something I hadn't quite seen before. And that was like visual and poetic and something that I could not make, something that, it would require very talented technicians and, camera operator who really understood like the pace of that boom and the crew. Like we had lightning machines going on outside and bringing down the lights and bringing up the storm and just graphics on screen as the sound design was coming together. There was a version of it in my head the way that it was going to go. And then once everyone got involved and brought their own creativity and their own skill to it, it's like everything in film. Like when you get into that collaborative mode and people start throwing in their ideas and make their contributions, it just becomes something that's just it just elevates it. But again, it's one of those things that so happy with the way it turned out and so thankful to everyone who made that scene happen.
Perfect translation from script to screen sort of a thing. It worked out really well in the end, but it just stuck with me, and I did want to ask you about that, so I'm glad it was planned.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess one of my final questions about the film is I don't want to go into too many spoilers, so people, if you haven't watched the movie yet, but you did change the ending sort of in a way from the book, and I was wondering what the thought process was behind that.
Yeah, for anyone who's read the book or has not read the book but is familiar with its lore, the book ends in a very abrupt final way, and it's quite dark, and it's very much what defines the book as a tragedy. The book is a tragedy. The book is very very much a defining piece of tragic romantic literature. But the character always seemed so funny to me, like his passion and the way that he complains in the letters that he's writing to his friend Wilhelm, who became Paul in our film. And, the spirit of the film that I wanted to make was to explore those same themes, to explore the unrequited love and friendship and the complicated gray areas of these relationships that felt true and human, but to do it in a way that felt more aligned with, I guess, the experiences I feel are more common today. You know, there's less, as much as we all have our romantic foibles can feel tragic. There can be situations we find ourselves in that feel hopeless. It not only would feel like irresponsible to me to mirror that exact ending from the book, but it also is not keeping in line with the tone of the film we were making, where, you know, it's one of growth and change. Ultimately, it's accepting that, you know, you are not the main character in anyone else's story. You're what you want. What Werther wants is not necessarily what Charlotte needs, even if she wants it too. There's the duty, expectation. There's family. I think where Werther ends up in the film is a place where he's been defeated and he's been cast aside, but that's not the end. This movie is just a chapter in their lives. It's not the whole story of their lives. They're both going to go on and have many, many more chapters to come.
And the credits were really fun for me. The German song and visiting Berlin, it was quite whimsical, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, what fun! What a great song. Yeah.
Germany has a lot of really great songs that I've heard, and it's usually they come up in humorous situations, but then I end up adding them to my Spotify playlist because they're very vibey and just a real fun time for sure.
Yeah, I didn't know a lot about German pop music until we had this idea. We're like, we should end the film for that dance sequence. It's got to be like a really strong piece of German pop, and we went deep on it. And what fun! What fun!
For sure. Well, I do want to thank you so much for coming on to talk about the film, and I do implore people to go watch it. But I like to ask all my guests a little question at the end, and that's a film recently that you've watched that you'd like to tell people about that maybe not enough people are hearing about, or just one that spoke to you. Because I always like to give movie recommendations, but I like to get recommendations from other people rather than always myself. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I just been in Vancouver, and on the plane, so a couple of recent movies that I hadn't seen. I loved Saturday Night. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it really was just kinetic and beautiful camera and really fun performances. I watched the new Alien movie, which I'd missed in the theaters, and I'm not even a massive Aliens franchise guy, but I thought it was excellent. At home, sorry, I'm like listing off movies now. At home recently, my 7-year-old has fallen in love with 2 films. One of them is Barbie. She finally saw Barbie. And so we've seen that about 15 times in the past week and a half. Fun. But the other film, and I guess this is my true recommendation, which my 7-year-old has watched twice now and wants to watch over and over and over again, is one of my favorite films of all time, The Princess Bride. It's perfect. It's a comedy, fantasy, adventure. If you've seen The Princess Bride, you know of its charms and its quality. If you've not seen it, I don't know if there's a more perfect movie. It's just wonderful. I could probably shadow cast the whole thing and quote it's just so quotable, so beautiful, so fun, so original, so specific. Watch 1987's The Princess Bride.
If you haven't watched it, watch it. If you have watched it, watch it again.
That's the exact right thing to say. Yes.
Yes. Well,
inconceivable. I did not come up with that myself. Yeah. Big Grony.
Indeed. Yeah. Indeed. But thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And I wish you all the luck, and I can't wait to see what you do next. So thank you so much.